Welcome to Character Matters, Positive Psychology Applied to Leadership. This webinar will conclude our Positive Psychology in the Workplace series. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Yusra Benjeloun, Administrative Coordinator and Project Manager with the Work Wellness and Disability Prevention Institute, and I'll be co-moderating the webinar today. This webinar is made possible through the support of the Community Gaming Grant Program through the BC government, as well as donations and memberships to WWDPI. We thank our program partners, Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, Education Advisory Committee, and speakers who contribute to this webinar series. While we're waiting for others to join us, I'll go over a few technical points for the webinar. You should be able to hear the presentation through your computer speakers or through the conference call line if you dialed in. Please use the question box to submit any issues you may be experiencing and to ask any questions you have related to the presentation. We will collect questions submitted throughout the presentation and follow the presentation with a Q&A based on the questions submitted. Following the webinar, any questions not answered in the allotted time will be answered and distributed after the event. The presentation will be recorded and posted for free on our website along with the slides. You will be emailed the direct links for all of these items when they're available. Today's webinar will be co-moderated by Dr. Gloria Gonzalez Morales, Associate Professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Guelph and Research Director of the Occupational Health and Positive Psychology Lab, and also co-founder of the Center for Workers' Health and Wellbeing. Gloria will be moderating our Q&A session, and I will let her introduce Dr. Lucas Monzani, who will be our presenter.
Hello, it's an honor to introduce Dr. Lucas Monzani. Dr. Monzani is an assistant professor of organizational behavior at Ivey Business School in Canada. Previously, he was a lecturer in leadership at the Graduate School of Management at Plymouth University in the United Kingdom. Also, he's an associate researcher at both the Institute for Organizational Development and Quality of Work Life of the University of Valencia in Spain, and the Center for Leadership and Behavior in Organizations at Goethe University in Frankfurt, Germany. Dr. Monzani completed a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship at the INO Itawotsky Institute for Leadership at the Ivey Business School of Western Ontario University. He holds a PhD in Psychology of Human Resources by the University of Valencia and is an Erasmus Mundus Master in Work Organizational and Personnel Psychology. His research interest lies within advanced concepts in organizational behavior, such as exemplary leadership, commitment to lead, and other topics bridging neuropsychology with organizational behavior. Whenever possible, Lucas Monzani combines his research activities with his professional practice as an executive consultant. He has extensive experience in a wide array of topics of corporate life, such as leadership potential assessment and development, executive coaching, advanced recruitment and selection techniques, virtual team building, and others. As a consultant, Dr. Monzani has contributed to several leadership development projects within the Department of Peacekeeping Operations of the United Nations. And having introduced you with all this information, Lucas, this is your turn to talk to us about how character matters and how we can apply positive psychology to leadership. Thank you.
So first of all, I would like to thank both the invitation of the Work Institute and Gloria for bringing me here to provide some insights about how leader character can enhance leadership behavior and leadership effectiveness. It's a great honor to be here, and I would like to share some ideas as long as I go through my webinar of how can we leverage the insights of positive psychology and apply them to the exercise of effective leadership. Before we start, we need to know what is effective leadership. So there are 3 approaches to understanding leadership and effective leadership. A first approach focuses on a person. And basically, under this approach, a leader is a person that makes the right decisions. For example, a CEO, a minister. And traditionally, the focus has been on the leader characteristics, their traits, their behavioral styles, and more recently, its character. There is a second approach to leadership that is called the relationship approach. and basically understands leadership as a relation between leaders, football coach, and followers, for example, football players here, Messi. And the focus of this approach is on the quality of the leader-follower or the leader-member exchanges. The logic behind it is that the higher the quality of the relationship, the better outcomes that both followers and leaders will receive from part of that relationship. And a third view is a systemic view in which leaders, followers, context, and other stakeholders are part of the leadership process. This approach combines person, relational, and strategic approaches to leadership into a larger whole. Today, I'm going to focus on leader character and on the person of the leader. And there are several reasons why I'm going to do this. First, we know from academic research that leaders matter and the person of the leader matters a lot because they are in the unique situation within the organizational structure to make decisions that will affect also followers, context, and the strategy of the organization. So whereas, of course, having a holistic view of leadership is important, focusing on leader character is critical, and I'll try to give you some evidence about that today. So why focus on leader character? Well, first let me tell you where my journey begins with this research. During October to December of 2008, I was doing my internship in the United Nations in the Department of Peacekeeping Operations. And there I was an involuntary witness of the insanity that happened in the financial markets. It was absolute madness. Nobody knew what's going on nor what to do about it. While I was in New York, my now colleagues at the Inatovich Institute for Leadership started trying to understand what drove this crisis, what happened, and so they started conducting an investigation, a process which I'm going to speak about in a second. So just to focus our listeners on the importance of the financial crisis of 2008 had on both practice and research, we academics understand and see this crisis as an absolute moral bankruptcy of a rigid system, where excessive greed and reckless risk-taking brought the house down literally, or the house market down. Of course, it's true that this crisis was multivariate in its nature and had a number of systemic effects that created the crisis. But at the time, financial organizations, the Security Commission, the SEC, and other stakeholders really minimized the role that these organizations' leaders, for example, the CEO of Lehman Brothers, Dick Fuld, had in propelling the crisis and how they were ineffective in tackling its negative consequences. It seemed that everybody was willing to let these leaders off the hook very easily so they can go and enjoy their golden parachutes. That means a bulk of money that CEOs get if they are fired, even if they're fired for not doing their job properly, while the world collapses around them. Professors Gans, Crossan, and Sykes wouldn't believe that leaders had nothing to do with it, so they literally put leadership on trial. From their multinational qualitative study, these Ivey professors concluded that character deficits in business leaders were a major and significant contributor. All these insights are collected on their book, Leadership on Trial, and it's available for the general public. It's an easy read for those who are interested in understanding what led to the 2008 crisis, but also to prevent repeating the mistakes that leaders did in the past. One of the most important insights of this book is that leadership can be explained as a product of three core characteristics. And for example, if you take the words of the Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett, when you're looking to hire leaders, you need to look for three qualities: integrity, intelligence, and energy. But most importantly, he affirms that if you don't have the first, if leaders don't have integrity, the inappropriate use of their intelligence and their energy will kill you, referring to your company. So from the Leadership on Trial book, there is a very simple model in which we have the three C's of an effective leader: competencies, character, and commitment. In business schools, we're really good at developing leader competencies. We know how to develop business competencies. We teach our students to strategize, make effective business plans. We teach our students how to manage people, how to lead teams effectively, or even how to reorganize organizations to adjust to the structure so they can adapt to the environment. Finally, we also teach them finance like auditing and taxes. All these are essential competencies that true leaders must have. And this is good. Effective leaders need to know what they're doing and how to navigate organizations across volatile, uncertain, ambiguous, and complex environments. Also, focusing in competencies allows aspiring leaders to learn how to develop these abilities without making any assumptions on their values, traits, or virtues, who leaders are. Finally, the commitment side of things provides the energy that Warren Buffett was talking about. But today I will not focus so much on commitment, I will focus more on character. Because from all these three C's, the one that is less understood is character. We know a lot about commitment, we know a lot about competencies, but the research that Professors Gans, Cross, and Sykes put forward showed that there is really no real understanding of what character is and how we can apply it to effective leadership. The main takeaway from this slide is that we need first to elevate character and commitment alongside competencies, because if any of these three pillars are deficient, the shortfall will undermine the other pillars and ultimately lead to performance problems for leaders, organizations, and other stakeholders like society as a whole. This leads us to the second aspect of our presentation, that we need to understand what character is. And this bridges more to the positive psychology theme of this series of webinars, because we draw heavily from the work of Peterson and Seligman and their conceptualizations of character as a set of virtues and supporting strengths. Before I get into that, allow me to give you a little short background on what positive psychology is. As the audience may know, at the beginning of the century, there was a shift in what we focus on when exploring and observing human functioning. In the past, psychology in general will focus on a person's weaknesses, their traumas, their neuroses, and so forth, and how to bring them back to a normal function. Instead, Peterson and Seligman suggested doing the opposite. Let's explore what makes people function at their optimal state, what brings the best that people can be. The logic was that if we're only focusing on the bad, we can never get to personal excellence. By focusing on weakness, we will always be trying to survive and not focusing on living the good life, what the Greeks call eudaimonia. It's a tough word, my apologies. So in their model, they come up with 6 main virtues, which are wisdom and knowledge, humanity, justice, temperance, transcendence, and courage. These virtues derive from a very in-depth qualitative work that Peterson and Seligman did, exploring time, cultures, and value systems, different philosophies and religions, trying to find what is the common denominator that seemed to appear across all cultures. And they came up as a result of that work with these 6 virtues. On the other hand, these virtues are supported by character strengths. So humanity, according to Peterson and Seligman, would involve the strength of love, the strength of kindness, and the strength of social intelligence. Whereas temperance would include the strength of humility, prudence, forgiveness, and self-regulation. When we try to apply this model of virtues to the business environment, we had a problem. The first problem was that the language used in Peterson and Seligman's models did not resonate well with leaders. Executives had a hard time incorporating words such as zest or love into their today leadership conversations. So in order to really put forward this notion of leader character, a knowledge translation was required. At the business school, we developed our own model of leader character, which honors Peterson and Seligman's models, but incorporated the insight of more than 300 leaders worldwide in an engaged scholarship project. Engaged scholarship in this context refers to creating knowledge by involving the subjects of knowledge alongside the experts. So in this case, the leaders were part of our theoretical development of our model. And the model of leader character was so successful that it's now an integral aspect of Ivey's leadership philosophy. We seek to build leaders who think strategically and act globally, but also have leadership character as their core foundational principle. So this is our leader character framework. It consists of 11 dimensions and has some modifications from what I just showed you about Peterson and Seligman's original framework. And the reason we have these modifications is because whereas Peterson and Seligman's framework may work very well for the general population, we're looking into a very specific population, which is leaders. And we need to find ways to develop not only their personal character, but also their leader character. Some of the things that we incorporated from Peterson and Seligman's, we kept some of their dimensions like transcendence, humanity, temperance. We renamed practical wisdom into judgment because, again, judgment was a word that resonated much better with leaders. We elevated some of the character strengths that Peterson and Seligman mentioned into the dimension category, like humility. And we also downgraded other elements as character strength into character elements. A very critical, important shift from the previous conceptualization is that we did place judgment as a central element in this model. That means that judgment works like an air traffic regulator, increasing or decreasing the strength of each character element as required by the context. In some contexts, for example, the final match of the FIFA World Cup or the Stanley Cup for our hockey lovers, one must be highly results-oriented. You need to win. You want to win the cup. And that's an element of drive, results-oriented. But you don't need to be so much results-oriented that you're willing to win at any cost, like cheating, for example, because that excess of a results orientation removes the honor in achieving victory in a sustainable way. Similarly, temperance is an effective regulator of this model because it enables leaders to remain calm and collected in stressful and difficult situations, usually when good leadership matters the most. In this way, leaders have a clear mind to make the right decision and not a decision that is driven either by negative emotions like fear or by excessive optimism like greed. Grasping the interconnected nature of the character dimensions and elements is difficult. My personal contribution to our institute was finding a way to test if this leader character network was in fact a network and if in fact judgment occupied a central role. You can find a detailed explanation of how I did it in our paper at the Journal of Management Studies, whose title appears below on the slide. So as you can see, courage, in this case, and transcendence, drive, collaboration, humanity, humility, integrity, temperance, justice, accountability, and judgment are dimensions, and things like elements like considerate, empathetic, compassionate, magnanimous, and forgiving cluster up into the dimension of humanity. Again, to facilitate the understanding of what this seems to be a complicated model, I would say that we use a metaphor. So in this case, I would like to use the metaphor of a power grid. In a power grid, you can generate electricity from many sources: coal, nuclear, solar, wind, and hydro. In my metaphor, these are different these different energy sources represent the different character dimensions. They're all distinct from each other, but interconnected, and all generate electricity in some shape or form. We call this foundational personal resources because depending on the type of resource, you can apply that to a larger goal. And we believe that all human beings have the potential to be leaders and have the resources, these foundational resources, to act effectively as leaders. But not everybody will become a leader. Only those who can actually utilize these resources effectively are more likely to emerge as leaders. The second point is that first, that these energy resources must be connected to each other. In my presentation, as you can see, the nuclear plant here produces a lot of energy. But if that energy plant would not be connected to other energy producing facilities or the distributor, which in this case represents judgment, we are creating a lot of energy, we have a lot of resources, but we're not able to apply it nor use the other resources to counterbalance it. So that creates a problem, because in traditional approaches to developing leadership, they use this notion that more is better. More charisma, more authenticity, more servant behaviors, more or higher quality relationships. But in fact, in order to be sustainable, leadership must be an harmonic balance of these different foundational resources. Also, because I cannot plug my computer to the nuclear plant, I need some resource as well that somehow regulates and harmonizes the output of all these foundational resources, which in a power grid is what we would call the distributing source, or for example, the transformer, right? In this way, we have raw energy converted into 110 volts that we can use in our homes. This is the role of judgment. And finally, we expect that once this energy is applied to the society, there are going to be a number of positive outcomes for leaders. For example, and one of great interest for us is whether does character predict leaders' well-being? And I will speak about that in a second. Also, does leader create sustainable profit for organizations? But more importantly, these two things occur within the creation of societal goods. So we will say yes. Let's take a second to let the information so far sink in and recollect some of the notions about character. So character is a habit of being and can be observed in behavior, but actually it's anchored in a set of virtues, values, and personality traits in our model. Each character dimension is composed of several elements, and the elements affect the strength of the particular dimension. The character dimensions are non-negotiable and interconnected. They all work together. Otherwise, virtues may become vices. Without temperance or humility, courage becomes recklessness. Our challenge as leaders is to master these elements and dimensions and achieve leader effectiveness and drive organizational excellence. The notion of organizational excellence goes above and beyond shareholder profit. We're not just only making sure that our organizations make money, but they make money in a decent and honest way. The third point of my presentation today is I want to show some evidence why character matters, because some of our audience would say, Lucas, yes, those are very nice and tidy ideas. I like the whole power grid thing, but is this really useful for my day-to-day leadership efforts, right? So I would say yes, and let me give you some evidence why. First, at Ivey, we're very lucky that we can expose our students to great speakers. And every year, the dream of most of my students is to get hired by these large consultancy firms like McKinsey and Company. So we decided last year to say, why don't we bring the head of McKinsey to give a talk at Ivey and see what he thinks about leadership and the future directions of where capitalism is going. Mr. Dominic Barton has a book that is called The Future of Capitalism, in which he describes the 10 major trends of, according to his vision, where character is going. And in the middle of the room with the 600 students, he gave us this fantastic quote. There is a growing belief that leaders can develop character in themselves, others, and their organizations. So without us even talking about anything about character, Mr. Barton was kind enough to validate our initial insights according to the experience and his conversations that he had with senior and world leaders. You can find an extended conversation of Professor Sykes and Mr. Barton in the YouTube link that I'm showing in here. Also, there's a mounting empirical evidence that character makes a difference to individual and organizational outcomes. I'll start talking about the organizational outcomes. Those are the things that we want to see in our organizations. So, for example, Fred Keel from a consultancy firm published a book in Harvard Business Review Press in which he explored there is any real financial outcomes of investing in leader character. And he looked at 4 aspects of character: integrity, responsibility, forgiveness, and compassion, and found that there is an average return of assets of 9.35% over a 2-year period. As control group, he explored the return on assets of people who scored low ratings in these character dimensions and elements, and had a return of 1.93%. So this is a really substantial difference, which shows the value of investing in developing character in organizational leaders. Now, there are some caveats that I must explain, because Dr. Keel did not use our model. So these results may not translate directly to our leadership model. So, for example, in our model, integrity is a character dimension. In this, we agree with Dr. Keel. However, we understand forgiveness and compassion as character elements that cluster into the character dimension of humanity and not as character dimensions. Overall, I would say that these are minor details and that the trend is there. Character matters not only for leaders, but also for organizations as well. Currently, at the Institute of Leadership, we are replicating this study and exploring what other outcomes relate to our leader character framework. So, for example, this is a summary of our ongoing research projects. As you can see, return of assets, it's the checkbox on the organizational level variables. But today, I think what is really interesting is the outcomes for leaders. For example, I'm finding a very strong link between developing leader character and leaders' psychological and emotional and social well-being. Also, leader character seems to enhance the role of competence in promoting, in increasing the likelihood of promotion, reducing the likelihood of leader derailment, and enhancing executive performance as rated by superiors, not rated by the leaders themselves. So, without rushing, we do understand that there is a need to explore how team leaders who are strong in character can create a positive climate in their environments, especially in the teams that lead. And this is the next step in our ongoing research. Can character be developed? This is one of the most important points of my presentation, because traditionally approaches to the study of human behavior mention and consider personality traits to be stable across time and across life once they are developed and not changing. So if you were born an extrovert, you will be an extrovert no matter what, according to those authors like Barrick and Mount. Or if you are open-minded or not open-minded, it doesn't matter in which context you operate, you always be open-minded. We would like to challenge this notion, and we would like to answer this question by saying, absolutely yes, character can be developed. And also, again, to illustrate some of the insights and ideas that are involved in this notion of character development, let me just use again 2 fictional characters. For example, Luke Skywalker in Star Wars or Frodo Baggins in the Lord of the Rings trilogies. Let's start by Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker, according to the story, was a farmer in the middle of nowhere, Tatooine, a planet, and eventually he was somehow precipitated into a leadership position. He became the red leader of the X-Wing squadron, but eventually he kept on going that path and became a Jedi Master, according to the mythology, and bringing peace and order to the galaxy. So Luke Skywalker is an example of how situational pressures, even things that are not experienced as willingly, like crucibles, can develop true character in leaders. And also how by developing that character, you can have positive outcomes on your organization. Now, Frodo is an interesting figure because it's the opposite. Basically, Frodo Baggins starts as a fantastic individual in again, also a farm boy in the middle of nowhere, the Shire. But unfortunately, by holding the ring and being precipitated into the ring bearer position, he started to be exposed to a toxic environment. So that toxic environment started to systematically erode Frodo's character until the culminating point in the series where he refuses to destroy the ring and becomes the same thing he was sought to destroy. These two opposing figures explore how situation and context can facilitate the emergence and development of character or can erode the existing character in leaders. So creating healthy and productive organizations is of absolute importance and essential to sustain the leader character development of potential or aspiring leaders. At Ivey, we use different approaches to developing character. We believe strongly in active and experiential learning, so we expose our students and those who participate in our executive educations to not only readings and workshops, but also simulations, role plays, or even there is an immersive simulation occurring that we do in collaboration with the Canadian Armed Forces that is called Leadership on Fire. And recently, that training program was received an award from the Association of Business Schools, if I am correct, an award from the Association of Business Schools. So to wrap up, leader character can be developed incrementally. So my next slide explains a book in which the general public can take a look at if they're interested in taking action to developing their leadership character. And again, was written by Professors Mary Crossan, Jerk Sayes, and Jeffrey Gans. In that book, there is a chapter by chapter explanation of how to develop first each one of these character dimensions, but also interconnecting them, which is the really original and important aspect of our work. To summarize the book, let me show you a sequential approach to developing character. So I was saying before, a foundational assumption of our model is that everybody could be an effective leader. And everybody has the character strengths, elements, and dimensions to become leaders. But not everybody will do. Not everybody is willing to discover, activate, strengthen, and sustain their character development. Not everybody is willing to take risks and be exposed to the crucibles that leader character entails. So the first step to develop your character would be trying to discover, through introspection and reflection, your latent character strengths. For example, I'm pretty sure that some of the audience may relate with the idea that you are going about your everyday life and then you're exposed to a crucible, a critical situation, and you respond admirably to it. And then you think to yourself, oh my God, I didn't know I had that in me. How did I find all that courage to tell that abusive supervisor that he was being mean to my colleague? Well, it's not only courage, it's also about humanity, right? Concern about your fellow humans. So this would be the first step. You need to discover that you have the character in you. The second step is actually activating your character. So you want to put yourself in situations that remind you, prime you, and reinforce your discovery of your character strengths, and that leads you to the third step, which is actually strengthening character. That means that you want to actively work to develop the character. And the logic behind strengthening character has to do with this notion of exercise. Imagine what happens to a muscle, right? The first day you go to the gym and you do a new routine, some part of your body starts to hurt and you don't even know why it hurts because you were exercising muscles that you didn't know that you had. Then by activating and priming yourself to go to the gym every day, you see that you start to work on strengthening your muscles on a daily basis. So this is the same thing with your character strengths and dimensions. By being humane and humble and compassionate and transcendent and courageous across a myriad of situations, you will start to find that these character strengths and dimensions start to energize you and propel you to new heights. What is absolutely critical for our model is this notion of interconnectedness. Because if you only develop your courage, then you'll find yourself making reckless decisions or emotional decisions if you don't develop temperance or humility to support your courage or your drive. Also, it may occur the opposite, that you're so humble that you become a pushover and you cannot really influence other people because you lose people's respect. So then you need the drive and the courage to support your humility and temperance. In general, the more interconnected and the more supported that these character dimensions are among each other, the more likely that you will be able to perform a high level all the time. And this leads us to the very last step of our developing character approach, is that you need to sustain this strength of character across contexts and under stress. Listen, if leadership would be easy, everybody would be doing it. So really, leadership shines in stressful and difficult situations. Only when you are presented with the opportunity of not displaying character is when your character shines. Only when you are displayed with the opportunity of being compassionate and human is when your character shines. If you neglect and you say, okay, I only have character at work, but not at my personal life, or I only be humane to this group of people, but not humane to this other group of people, then you're not embodying what we understand as leader character. You're allowing what it would be otherwise a virtue become a vice, but not being sustained by the other dimensions across contexts and stressful situations. So almost closing up to the presentation, I would like to leave you with some parting thoughts. For example, one of the key concepts I would like for our audience to retain from these presentations are the 3 C's of leadership. Leaders' competencies, character, and commitment work together to deliver sustained excellence in organizations and in life. Character is a habit of being. It's more than personality traits or values. Strength of character derives from interconnectedness. Remember about the power grid, how all these different dimensions mutually support each other and how they help each other. Character can be defined, assessed, and developed for self and others using self-report measures. For example, our Institute of Leadership collaborates with Sigma Assessment Systems, who developed a tool that is called the Leader Character Insight and Assessment, which provides not only your scores on character, but practical insights on how to develop your character. Another important thing that showed up from our own research is that character and competence are entangled. In order to sustain your technical performance, you need to deliver virtuous leadership. So again, remember the words of Warren Buffett: you want integrity, intelligence, and energy, but if you don't have integrity, which we would say if you don't have character, competencies and commitment applied to destructive goals will bring your organization down. Finally, because character is not just about a person, but the importance that this person had within an organizational system, like an organization and a firm, you want to try to shape a culture of character by embedding character in their people practices, but also in their strategies and reward systems. If we do not embed character in our HR selection practices, we're going to be bringing the wrong people into the organization. But also, if we do not reward those who already are part of our organizations when they display character in a high strength, we're very unlikely to sustain this organizational efficiency in time. The reason we focus so much on leaders is because leaders, and particularly senior leaders, have a unique position within the organizational structure and hierarchy to start making these shapes and start shaping a culture, a positive culture of character. So for all you leaders who are there, I would like to invite you and consider and reflect how you can embed character in your own life and also in your own organizations. So with this, I would like to conclude my presentation and open the door for questions. Thank you very much for paying attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Monzani. This has been a very, very interesting webinar that has given us a very different perspective from the other webinars where we were talking about what employees can do. In this case, it's about what leaders can do to make the workplace a better one. So there's some questions about this. One of them is, would it be mandatory to incorporate all the 11 elements to the leader character framework in order to get a positive leadership impact, or are there any primary elements to focus when training and development?
Okay, so to answer this question, I would say yes. These 11 character dimensions and its constitutive elements are all non-negotiable. This is not a laundry list where you can say, okay, today I'm going to be courageous and humane and integrous, but tomorrow I'll be more accountable and Wednesday I'll be just, right? No, this is the main contribution of our framework. Is basically you cannot sustain virtuous leadership and prevent, for example, courage from moving from a virtue, which is a virtue, courage is a virtue, from becoming a vice by excess or deficiency. And the more that you interconnect all these character dimensions and elements, the more likely that you're able to support a focal dimension with the other remaining 10.
Okay, so what leadership programs exist that can develop these elements all together?
So as I was saying before, there are at Ivey we have a number of leadership programs that are tailored to different organizations. For example, we work very closely what is called the Ivey Academy, which focuses on executive education. But also, as I was saying in my presentation, we embed character into our teaching of our HBA students and MBA students. And we do have the aforementioned Leadership on Trial, which we do with our HBAs and MBAs, as well as large number of workshops that we do. We use, for example, a workshop based on the leadership of Nelson Mandela, which we believe it's a great example of how to embed character in leadership and have a positive impact on society. Mandela, we believe, applied all these character dimensions to his leadership and prevented the post-apartheid South Africa from going to a civil war. And was by the strength of his character that the society in South Africa started the path of reconciliation, which I think it was an amazing and exemplary leadership, or an exemplary example of leadership.
Okay, so following up on that, if this is so essential and so important, why isn't there enough studies focusing on character yet?
Well, this is a very good question. The fact is that we are conducting a large number of studies, but as our colleagues may know from academia, the publishing process, it's peer reviewed, so it needs to be supervised and worked with anonymous peer reviewers. Therefore, the lag time within the work on leader character takes a while, right? We do have the data, but making it up to publish its journals, of course, it has its own rhythms sometimes. I can also maybe go back to my last slide in which there are some suggested reading. These are lists really for good papers that people may read if they're interested in. They're all published in top-tier journals and also in the Financial Times 50 journals list. So this, particularly, I would suggest the Journal of Management Studies or the paper in the Journal of Business Ethics. Those are really two good, two conceptual papers. The Journal of Management Studies is an empirical paper, and there are more on the way. So just bear with us until we get those papers published.
Okay, let's talk a little bit then about the research. And someone is asking, why are self-report measures reliable to assess and define character? On what basis self-reporting, like that I self-report my own characteristics and how do I feel that I have a strength is actually reliable? I think that this person is asking like kind of like, what about the viewpoint of the followers, for example?
Yes, I think this is a
I want,
very
yeah, and I want to link it to another question that they're asking: how do self-report measures as a Sigma LCIA work?
well, perfect. So without going into the more psychometric properties of our measure, because I understand that's not the point of our webinar. However, I would like to make some distinctions. First, this is not a this is not the LCA is not just a self-report measure, but actually it's a 360 measure, which incorporates multiple informants. That means we have information, of course, the self-reports, but we have other reports. And with the 360 approach, we use supervisors, reports of character, followers, direct reports of character, and peers, direct reports of characters. So I completely understand the concern of the participants saying, well, can we really trust the self-report measure? I would say no and yes. Of course, we cannot trust it alone, but when we can trust self-report measure as a data point in which we can also contrast and triangulate with other reports and see if there's a holistic picture coming up. Also, again, I won't get into the details, but the network analysis insights from network theory and network analysis allows us to compare what it would be, what I call the structure of correlations between latent constructs. That means that if you map the different correlations between the different aspects and dimensions of the character, you get a network structure. Then you can try to overlap that network structure with the network structure that results from the other people's reports and see how much do they overlap. The logic behind that is that the stronger the overlap between self and other reports, the more likely that we are within a phenomenon that is existing in reality. So on the other hand, regarding how the Sigma works, well, the Sigma LCA, basically it's an inventory of 61 observable behaviors, each one describing a character element, and we ask self and others to report the likelihood of that behavior occurring. So then you have a rating, if I'm correctly, from 1 to 5, a Likert scale, and another option saying I don't know. So that would be the null item. And what we do is we aggregate the different scores into the dimensions. We also use the traditional confirmatory factor analysis approach to verify that the latent structure of the 11-factor model works. And that is what we are, again, trying to publish. So we're very confident in the psychometric properties of our measure.
Okay, good. So to the best of your knowledge, what are the barriers that prevent leaders from developing the right elements of their character? So for me, like I was thinking like maybe just self-awareness. Like I kind of think about a lot of leaders that think that they're in a way, but they actually are lacking a lot of character strengths that they should be working on. But if they don't have self-awareness, how they can work on that?
Exactly. So what you're talking, Gloria, is precisely the first point of the character development, is the discovery of your character, right? You need to be self-aware and self-conscious about all these character strengths. Another barrier external to the leader may be the context in which leaders operate. So as I was saying with the example of Frodo, you may be a leader who has by life and by own self-reflection develop your own character strengths, but you start to operate in a context which erodes the possibility of displaying those character strengths in a daily basis. If the organization systems and cultures and policies do not reward the proper use of character in a leadership position, it would be very unlikely that people take the risk of doing so unless they are absolutely convinced of the strength and the importance of character. This is, of course, an organizational view to an individual phenomenon, but I think that probably one of our next steps is how we use leader character to create a constructive and positive culture, which in turn relates to organizational practices that facilitate the display of character in everyday life.
That's a great answer, because it's kind of answering the last question that I had here. That was, can you talk us about, can you talk to us about the next steps of research in this field after the publishing of the peer review? What needs to be done to make an effective impact in the workplaces?
So, ironically, we're having more effective impact in the workplace by our outreach activities than by our published papers. It looks like when we publish papers, we're talking to the academia and not to practitioners. And practitioners get the importance of character much faster than our peer reviewers. This is a personal opinion, of course. But the truth is that I've been teaching leader character all across the world. I've been in Namibia, I've been in Ukraine, I've been in South America, in North America, in Europe, and everywhere I go, people get it. People understand the importance of character. So basically, when I talk to an executive in Ukraine or in Namibia, they get the importance of drive and courage and transcendence, and sometimes they struggle with the notions of like humanity and humility. But once you explain how these more humane sides of leadership support the more results-oriented approach to leadership, then they totally get it. And again, what it turns out is that we have three fronts in the institute. We have the teaching front, the research front, and the outreach front. And of course, our strategy as an institute is to harmonize all these three fronts. So, following and honoring the notion of engaged scholarship approach, we allow our teaching insights, and when teaching with executives or providing executive education, to inform our research, in turn which that research informs our teaching with our HBAs and undergrads, and the insight and the fresh insights that fresh minds have also provide new insights to teach on more established leaders. So this triadic combination between teaching, outreach, and research allows us to have a lot of impact in society, even more than through just focusing on publishing papers in academic journals.
Okay, so if you could give us some tips on the people who are looking, the participants in this webinar, they're trying to figure out, okay, so how can I implement this in my workplace, in my organization? Do you have some tips on how to do that?
Yes, I would say that character starts by oneself, right? And this is like a wave in a pond. When you throw a rock in a pond, it creates a series of synchronic waves. And the first wave is very little, but as it starts to grow, it becomes larger and larger. So my belief is that for anyone who is interested in applying character to organizations, I would suggest to start by, as you were well suggesting, start discovering, and that process I was showing in the slides. Start by discovering what are your character strengths, what are the things you need to work on, and then make a conscious and volitional decision to start exercising both the things that need some work and the things that you do really well. And as process, in the same way as you start training for a marathon, you can start slowly. Sometimes you don't need to be this super high interconnected leader. You just need to start working on your courage or your humility or the thing that is more obvious to you. Once you start doing that, you can become a role model for others to imitate. For example, Mandela used his counterpart in the rugby team, Francois Pinard, and he started developing Francois Pinard character. And he knew that if he did that, then Pinard would do the same with his team. In the same way, Mandela started working with his very close people around him, his security guards, and started to bridge the division between their former party members, which were black security officers, and the new security officers that were the security forces for the previous president. Mandela knew that he needed to harmonize both because one had the expertise and the other ones had the energy. So by doing that, Mandela started slowing, spreading, and developing character in others as a result of 27 years of developing character himself in an island.
Good. Okay, well, that's very, very inspiring. I'm sure a lot of us will start working on figuring out our character strengths and our weaknesses and start working on it. Thank you so much. And I hope that everybody has enjoyed the whole series. Now, I think Yusra has to do some final announcements.
Well, thank you very much to both of you. Thank you very much, Lucas, for teaching us about the importance of character, the 11 non-negotiable elements for leaders' character that are interconnected, and that character can be trained and developed so that leaders can effectively and positively impact themselves, their organizations, and others. And Gloria, we are arriving to a bittersweet moment today with this last webinar of the positive psychology in the workplace. Thank you so much for your effective collaboration and your essential role in regards to all the webinars of this series, especially the one you have presented on work stressors and when they make you grow. It is a pleasure having you both on air with us today. Thanks again. And to our audience, a special thank you for joining us and for your participation.